Check out those sweet jazzy sounds I was playing right there. Now you might not have heard the chords that I was playing over, but you could tell that I was playing over some kind of harmony. And again, what we're talking about in this lesson, this is lesson 36, we're talking about 2-5-1s and how to make 2-5-1s more expressive and even more interesting than what we were doing in our last lesson. And essentially what I was doing over the chords, in this case we're back in C again, playing a D minor chord to a G chord to a C major chord, is I was elaborating or extending the sound of the G7 chord by adding more color to the notes. It's like I've got the sound of G7 that would be articulated by just, let's say the arpeggio would be fine, or the full mixed Lydian scale. And that's fine. It sounds very inside the chord. It sounds like it fits the chord, but there's nothing spicy about it. There's no extended colors or altered colors. And the essential components of a dominant seventh chord that make it work and resolve nicely to the one chord is the tritone inside the chord. These two notes right here resolve strongly to the one chord. So when G7 is moving back into the one chord, the reason it's doing it effectively is because these two notes, the flat 7 and the third of the G chord, go in opposite directions and resolve to the C chord. So the inherent quality of a dominant chord is one of tension, and tension that can resolve back to the one chord. Okay, so this is where you can add to that tension. You can take this inherent tension that's in the chord and you can add extra color to it. Not just the color of the scale itself, but notes around the scale and around the chord. So what I've done here is I've drawn out a dominant 7 shape. You can see these notes right here are the dominant 7 shape that I've spelled out, where I haven't actually done anything but just darken the notes. Now the other notes around, I've actually written the tones. And these tones refer to the colors that you could add to the dominant 7 sound. Let's say this is G7 right here. You can add a G7 and you can play a sharp 5 if you'd like, along with the other notes. So you can play the sharp 5 in the arpeggio, and it sounds great. It sounds like an altered note. But you can hear how it adds a little bit more drama or tension over the chord, right? And I could set it up different ways. And then I can resolve it. Now let's listen to that one note over the 5 chord of my little 2-5-1. I've noticed that I've doubled up my 5 chord here to give you a little bit more time so you can really hear the notes and how they create the tension. Okay, so here we go. I've got a little swing thing recorded here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again. Doesn't that sound sweet? One note that's added to the arpeggio. Right? Now, the important thing is that you understand that you got to resolve back into C major here, because this note is not going to sound good when you play it over C major. It's going to sound really bad. So I'm adding a note that's outside the key of C major, but it's an interesting note against the G7 chord. but after the G7 chord is over, I'm going to resolve back into a strong C major sound. So that note tends to want to go up to the third of the C major chord, or it could even go down to the second degree of C major, and then it could resolve. But you got to get off that note and resolve to another note in the key. Now let's explore a different sound. Let's explore the flat 9. Now notice I'm calling it the flat 9. It's right next to the root of the chord. So what you might be asking, why wouldn't I call it the second degree or the flat 2? Well, against the dominant chord, dominant 7, when there's a 7th degree in the arpeggio, then we don't refer to this note as the second degree. We refer to it as the 9th, because if you count all the way up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, this would be 9, and that's simply up an octave of the same note. So the A is the 9th, and the A flat is the flat 9. And there it is right there. So let's see if we add that, how it would sound. Okay, so once again, one note added to the arpeggio. 2, 3, 4. Again. Isn't that kind of cool? It's very melodic, but it works, right? Okay, now we can even explore the sharp 9 on top and maybe use that in combination. So I'm going to play the flat 9 and the sharp 9 together, and I'll still play the G7 on the bottom. Now I've got more melodic intervals I can use around. There's D minor 7. I'll just play something as I've been doing around the scale of C major or the arpeggio of D minor. But when I get to the G7, I start off with the arpeggio, and I go all the way up to the flat 9 or the sharp 9, and I just mess around with those little notes and see how I can resolve them back into C. So this really opens up the possibilities now. I've just got one more note. 2, 3, 4. Oops. 2, 3, 4. See how that made it a little bit more interesting? That sharp 5 as well. Check this out. Now I've got 3 alternate notes. A few more notes in there, but the fact is now we're starting to create the sound of jazz now with these extra color notes over the 5 chord. That's one of the most obvious things about playing over jazz harmony, is that you'll hear jazz musicians embellish the chords. They embellish the chords not only on the 5 chord here, but they like to play around with the other kinds of chords too. They add notes outside of the key, and they enhance the chords with extra color notes, because it makes their melodies, more interesting, and they just have more creative expression that way. So you can see you can even add the flat 9 on the bottom here. You can also add the flat 5. Here's another note that we haven't talked about. So it's not just the flat 9 are here and the sharp 9 are right here, but they can also be flat 9 and sharp 9. And the sharp 5 or flat 5 could be right there. So when you start adding them in different octaves, you really open up your whole concept of what you could do for one simple chord, but you know, it really makes your melodies more interesting. And it doesn't really matter, honestly, if the person is playing a dominant chord that doesn't have any alterations. They can be very, very simple. I'm giving you some color in that recording, but even if I were just playing a dominant chord and you play those notes over the top of it, it still sounds effective because this chord has tension in it right here, right? And even if I'm not adding it in the voicing I'm playing, the notes enhanced along with this tension work together to create an area of tension and a climax in this chord that resolves on this chord. Okay? So you could practice the exercise by going maybe up the arpeggio and adding one note on the top. In this case, the flat 9. You could do it another time and add the sharp 9. Maybe the next time add the sharp 5. Right, see how I did it there? I had to kind of double it back a little bit. Right? Maybe the flat 5. Yeah, that's it. Right? And it really gets into, you know, creative kind of ways of singing the notes and adding them in different parts of the arpeggio. Now you'll see what I did right next to the arpeggio shape is that I filled out a whole scale around the chord that we have of a G7. Now the third in this case is not on this string where it would be. It's actually right here. But check out the whole altered sound of this scale now. Listen to this. We've got now what this is essentially like, this is like playing a G7 arpeggio, but adding these alterations along the way. So it's a full scale, not just an arpeggio. And instead of using a natural fifth, we just get rid of the fifth altogether. So all we have is the flat 9s, sharp 9s, and the flat 5s, and the sharp 5s, as well as the rest of the notes of the arpeggio, except for the 5. So it sounds like this now. Now, that's called an altered scale. It's an altered scale from the G. It's a G altered scale, which is essentially another name for a melodic minor scale. You might have heard jazz musicians talk about that, or maybe you've read it in a theory book. It's the 7th mode of the melodic minor scale. In other words, this is actually an A flat melodic minor scale, but I'm using it against a G altered chord. Okay, so it's really easy to create the jazz sound by simply taking your dominant chord and going up a half step and playing what's called a melodic minor scale. Okay, but this is the reason it works, is because it creates all these tones against your dominant 7 chord, which is where you want to create the color. So check it out. I'm going to use the whole altered scale now over the 5 chord, okay? I'm going to play it from the lower octave all the way up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Messing around with it now to make it a little bit more interesting. really hear that I'm creating some tension on the chords, but as long as I resolve back to the sound of this chord, it really works every time. And it sounds more interesting as a melodic device because you're getting colors in the chords that you wouldn't get if you just played inside the key. I mean, just compare that now to what I was playing before we had an altered scale. Listen to how inside it sounds. Okay, here's just the straight scale of C major over all three chords. 2, 3, 4. It's okay, but it's a little bit lacking in spice. There's the spice I'm adding. Okay, so that was a lot of fun, wasn't it? Really hips up your playing, and you're going to have a lot of success with that if you really practice it and explore those sounds. We're going to start off really simple at first, where I'm just giving you one pattern of the altered scale, but I think you'll agree that you'll find a lot of places for it when you learn other patterns as well. But just take this one position of a 2-5-1 progression and just start working it out over these chords, and you really open up your playing a lot. And we're going to talk about other ways you can use it in lots of other styles besides just jazz. All right, so I'll talk to you on the next lesson. Dave Hill, signing off. See you later.